All right, let's dive into some of the most secret and honestly most influential groups of the ancient world, the mystery schools. These weren't just clubs, they were places that promised a total transformation of who you are. So let's pull back the curtain and see what was going on. But first, I want to plant a question in your mind that's going to frame everything we talk about today. What if all the great myths you've ever heard, from Greece, from Egypt, wherever, what if they weren't just random stories? What if they were all secretly telling one single, profound story about us? Keep that idea in your back pocket. For thousands of years, these secret societies, known as the mysteries, were basically sacred universities. But their curriculum wasn't what you'd expect. No, they were tackling the biggest questions there are. Where did we come from? Why are we even here? And the big one, what happens when we die? Now, the most famous of all these were the Eleusinian mysteries in Greece. And get this, for over 1,400 years, the smartest, most influential people in the ancient world made a pilgrimage to Eleusis to take part in their secret rites. I mean, that's an incredible run. Their ideas spread all the way to Rome and even as far as Britain. And really, Eleusis was just the most famous branch on a huge tree. You had the Orphic tradition, which was all about the soul's journey. You had the Bacchic, which was about finding the divine through, well, ecstatic experience, and the Hermetic tradition, which was all about cosmic secrets. They all had their own unique flavor, but they were all exploring the very same core truths. This stuff was everywhere. So, what was the big secret they were all teaching? Well, the amazing thing is, it was hidden in plain sight, right inside a myth that pretty much everyone knew. And that brings us to the core allegory of the mysteries, the story of Persephone's descent into the underworld. So the story goes something like this. You've got Persephone, the picture of pure innocence, just hanging out, picking flowers. Suddenly, the ground splits open. Pluto, the god of the dead, bursts out and yanks her down into his dark kingdom, Hades. There, she's forced to become his queen. It's this incredibly dramatic story of innocence being shattered. But here's the secret to Coda Ring. This isn't just a myth about a goddess. The initiates of the mysteries understood that this was an allegory for, well, for us. Persephone is the pure divine soul. Her being dragged down into Hades, that symbolizes our soul becoming trapped inside a physical body, in this material world, which, compared to where the soul comes from, is a pretty dark and confusing place. And here's where it gets even more fascinating. The story of Persephone isn't a one-off. It's actually a version of a universal pattern that you can find in cultures all over the world. The myth of the god who dies, goes into darkness, and then is miraculously reborn. This chart just lays it out so clearly. You have Persephone, who gets dragged to the underworld but comes back for half the year. Then there's Bacchus, who's literally torn to pieces by titans but is brought back to life from his heart. Or Adonis, who's killed by a boar but rises from his tomb. See the pattern? It's the same story over and over again, death and resurrection. And this wasn't just, an abstract idea. It had a deeply practical purpose. The Roman statesman Cicero put it perfectly. He said the mysteries didn't just teach you how to live a good life. They taught you how to die without fear. They show you that death wasn't an end, but just one part of a much bigger, much more beautiful cycle. Which leads us to the actual experience of all this, the path of the initiate. See, these myths weren't just stories to listen to. They were a map. The whole point was to guide a person through their own symbolic death and rebirth, to take them from a state of spiritual ignorance all the way to enlightenment. The journey was broken down into two main stages. First, you had the lesser mysteries. This was all about facing the problem head-on, the pain and confusion of the soul being trapped in the body, seeing reality through a dark filter. At this stage, you were called a mystess, which means one who is veiled. But then you could move on to the greater mysteries, which was all about the solution, freeing the soul and finally achieving true, unveiled spiritual sight. So how did they imagine this liberation? Well, one of the coolest models comes from the Hermetic teachings. They saw it as a journey after death or in deep meditation, where the soul travels up through the spheres of the 7 planets. And at each planetary gate, the soul gives back a flaw associated with that planet. It's like shedding layers. You'd return your ambitions to the sun, your passions to Venus, your anger to Mars, until you were completely purified of all that earthly baggage. And after you've completed that cosmic journey, after you've shed all those layers, you reach the final goal. You become an epoptis. It's a Greek word, and it's so powerful. It means one who has seen. Not someone who believes or hopes or was told, but someone who has witnessed the truth of the universe with their own eyes. Okay, so you might be wondering if these schools were so powerful, where did they all go? Did they just disappear? Well, no, not at all. The wisdom didn't vanish, it just changed its clothes, echoing down through the centuries in philosophy, art, and even religion. I mean, their influence is just immense. Plato's entire philosophy is basically built on the framework of the mysteries. The core ideas of Hermeticism, as above, so below, were passed down through secret societies for ages. Even the story of Atlantis is thought by many to be an allegory for this lost spiritual knowledge. And most importantly, that central theme of spiritual death and rebirth, it became a cornerstone for so many religions that came later. Now, the official institutions, they did eventually end. Around the year 400 AD, the Roman emperor shut down the last of the great schools. But by then, they'd been running for almost 2,000 years. Their ideas were already baked into the DNA of Western civilization. So while the buildings might have closed, their central story never ever died. This idea that there is a divine spark inside each of us, a piece of light that has fallen into the darkness of the material world and is just yearning to go home, that has become one of the most powerful stories we've ever told ourselves. And that leaves us with one final thought. This ancient story of falling, of being tested in the dark, and of returning to the light has survived for millennia. Why? What is this timeless story of death and rebirth trying to tell us about our own lives right here and right now? Something to think about. Thanks for watching.